Thank you, Patricia. It is with pleasure that I have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Evian Gordan. Evian is a scientist and a medical doctor. He is the founder, chairman, and chief medical officer of TotalBrain.com, an online health tech company that supports mental health in over 1.5 million employees in 40 brand named companies across the United States. He founded the largest standardized international brain database with over 1 million data sets to discover what insights and trainings work best to generate new habits, including less stress and better sleep. He also works with the American Heart Association and the American Institute of Stress. His latest book is titled The Brain, From Knowing to Doing. He will be sharing his insights today about better sleep. Evian has also co-founded or co-developing, he is, an online wellness and lifestyle medicine program called ThinkHeart with the American Heart Association and a course on solutions for better sleep. Please give Evian a very warm Golden Gate Breakfast Club welcome, and we really look forward to hearing your insights on how to sleep better. Welcome, Dr. Gordan.
Thank you so much, Betty. I just want to share my screen with sound. There we go. It's a great pleasure to be here again this morning. I really enjoyed our session last time when I spoke, and thank you, Betty, for the introduction to the Golden Gate Breakfast Club. I'm actually speaking to you from a home that my wife and I rent from Betty on the beautiful water in a kind of bird sanctuary almost in Spinnaker Point. And what a wonderful place, Betty, to be able to craft the sort of online programs that we develop. So this morning I will be speaking to you on how to sleep better. And it's going to be focused on a small number of things, but there is, while my focus and what I've learned over the last 40 years, I just recently turned 70 and took it as an opportunity to really think back on the hundreds of studies that collaborators have magnanimously done and shared their insights with me and my team. And really want to share with you in these few minutes, not just the should lists that are sort of drowning us all, like you should, and there's this whole list of things that people say you should do. But rather, I want to focus on not the knowing, but the doing. Like, what are we actually doing for real? Because the biggest gap is between knowing and doing. So I'm hoping not to bore you with another long list of should things, although I will be sharing with you what you all know, the list of things that are out there about what we should do with sleep. But I really want to magnify the learnings that we've seen about what it takes to actually do something, even small, today, that helps you sleep better and stress less. And I suppose I want to really emphasize that for this obvious reason. We all think that you've got to, change is so hard. And we all think it's got to be something big. But the amazingly powerful thing about the brain, the virtue about change, if there is one about the brain, is that it is so highly interconnected. It's astonishing how these 85 billion nerves so intertwine and are so exquisitely sort of in a sort of symphonic dance all day, that even if you do one small change, it's like dropping a pebble into the water, and the flow-on effects can be very, very big and very beneficial. So there's three issues, the knowing pieces that I will talk about, but I will just emphasize as we go, what are the elements that really make the doing possible? Talk about the basis of sleep, obviously, just to get that out the way, and then talk about the circadian rhythm in which we all live, the day-night 24-hour cycle, and then let's look at some habits. Like, what are some of the solutions that have been found to work? And what is the one thing that we can do to get that ball rolling? Because we all start from different places. So obviously, let's just start off with the basis of sleep. We all know how important sleep is to re-energize. And, you know, a third of our life is spent in sleep. And the roles are just so profound. And I know, you know, Tim Birkin was saying before we started that sleep is just so profound and powerful. And there's so many podcasts about sleep for good reason. Sleep and stress are the two very most important issues for wellness, for well-being across the board, all chronic illness, reversing age. And we all know that. And we all know that when you do not have optimal sleep and natural sleep, and it's not a habit, the impact is astounding. It crosses every organ system, every mental capacity, every chronic illness, every mental health condition can be precipitated by, or certainly made worse by, poor sleep. And last but not least, one of the groups we're building the sleep course for is for truck drivers, because the number of accidents that occur when people drive when they're fatigued is astonishing. Now, I'm not going to be sciencey this morning, but I do want to say these two things, that we live in this awake and sleep state. And it's called the circadian rhythm. But the interesting part about that rhythm is it's actually 90-minute cycles that I'll talk to in a moment a bit more. So we actually have a time clock that we kind of can be empowered by, tuning into the fact that throughout those 24 hours, there are 90-minute cycles. And we'll talk about the so what about that in a minute. But the point of this slide is to make a much more simple and pointed takeaway, which is that in our brains, there is literally a switch that begins sleep. It happens to have a technical name, doesn't really matter. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, but it doesn't matter. It's the size of a pinhead. And it literally is like a light switch. If it's aroused, if it's activated through input, it will not switch off. But if it's calm and the light is dimmed, the switch goes on. And if we do not see it as a switch, that is the first takeaway of the doing, the gap between knowing of doing that I want to share with you. I want to share also with you, just before we go into the sort of solutions and the big solution of what actually can we do today to do one thing that'll change that cascade, that small change can have big effects. I want to share the most interesting study with you that we did in sleep. We did a lot of studies in sleep, but the one that stands out to me is the one with what is disturbed with one night's sleep, just one, where you have less than 6 hours. And we look at a lot of people and we work with the major sleep researchers, and it's just astonishing. Even one night can change your brain function. It can change your focus the next day, reduce your focus. You're in a worse mood. You're not as aroused as you should be. And we all know this, that even one night we get tired late in the afternoon. Now, I know we all know this, but I want you to just show this in data, because sometimes words are not enough to get through to our unconscious brain. Our unconscious brain is very smart. And sometimes the words are kind of, oh, goodness, I've seen that before. But data of this type sometimes just gets through the kind of the filters and kind of lands. And I'll just leave that there. One night. So imagine the cumulative effects of many nights. So I know we're all familiar with the two basic parts of sleep, but just for completeness, insomnia is where you're really having difficulty to fall and stay asleep. And it's primarily due to stress. But it's not only stress. As we'll come to in a moment, there are lots of things that can affect our sleep. But we don't want to get overwhelmed by them. My whole point of this morning and sharing with you all is that think about sleep as a 24-hour cycle. And so we need to be aware, or we might want to be empowered to be aware of all the things that can have flow-on effects to affect our sleep. But stress is the most important and the most obvious. Whereas sleep apnea is a little more tricky, because there's actually a soft tissue at the back of our throat that is blocking our breathing tube. So we're not getting oxygen to our brain. And that is something that is different. That is sort of mechanical. Now, yes, there are issues like a bit of overweight and stuff that can make that worse. But basically, it's just the luck of the draw. It's the way our shape of our face is. And so there's some people, if it's severe enough, that obviously, as we know, want to do something about it. That's more, mechanical. Those are the two types of sleep. And I want to move on, because that's all stuff we know. And it's just, I'm hoping that the awareness, at least, that it's very straightforward. There's nothing complicated about it, actually. But it's how do we now tune into the doing? So let's just have a moment of pause there, and just let's start thinking now about sleep as what I call a circadian rhythm. That let's take on board that we live in 24-hour cycles, night and day. We all know that. The top slide, black and white slide there, night and day. But within that night and day are these 90-minute cycles. They're called ultradian dips. And during the day, we have energy dips. If you look on the screen on the left below the black and white day and night slide, you can see there's dips every 90 minutes. And we lose energy during those dips. They're sort of recovery dips. But it's useful to know about them, because it's a reason why people go and get coffee at 11 a.m. usually and 3 or 4 p.m. because that's when the dip occurs. There's a reason that everybody feels, we don't think about it astutely enough, but from the time we wake up, you can clock yourself every 90 minutes. There's going to be a dip. And you may want to factor that in, because if you mess with those dips and you don't recover, what's going to happen? They're going to affect how well prepared your brain is for sleep later that night. Similarly, and astonishingly, when we sleep in 90-minute cycles. What do I mean by that? That sleep is a very hardwired cascade, but we dream every 90 minutes. And if you look at the little purple areas in the dream cycle there on the right-hand slide, the first dream cycle, we dream for about 5 minutes. The second dream cycle, about 10 minutes, and so on, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So you don't want to mess with that cycle. You want that cycle to be kicking in if you can. And of course, that's tricky for lots of reasons. But I just wanted to make the point, and I'll leave it at this. Everything you do today, when you eat, when you stop eating, when you exercise, you can now think about it. If you want to be just before you go to sleep, whatever time that is, we'll come to that in a moment. If you want to be tired, you want to be as unstressed as possible, and you want to have been in a rhythm, then sleep begins when you wake up, because you can prepare for a lot of things. The solutions start by awareness that it is a cycle. And the more you mess with that cycle and throw out the rhythm, the harder it's going to be to sleep. And as we know, we all need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and less than that has health implications. So I want to end off with the fun part. Okay, so what can we do that's not just a should list, that can get us optimizing wherever we're starting at, wherever we are? How do we get across this gap from knowing to doing? I don't want this presentation, the sharing with you this morning, to be infotainment. I really love sharing with people what others have taught me and what I've learned, and these wonderful researchers have shown, that how do we get across that log, those logs, that bridge, and how one small piece can lead to a cascade to get us from knowing to doing. Well, you don't have to read my book to get this. I just want to summarize it for you in this slide, that there's actually 3 steps to getting across that gap. You want to be clear. You want to be ready. If you're not ready, you're not going to do it. You're just not going to buy into it. So you need to know your why. Why am I doing this? Or am I just going through the motions or reading another article and go, oh, I should be doing that? It can make people feel like a failure when they read stuff and don't do it. So be ready. And if you're not ready, get ready if you want to. And know what you're going to do. And the second thing is, it's all about how you train. And one thing needs to be non-negotiable, because of course, nobody likes to be told what to do, and I'm not telling you anything what to do. I'm just sharing with you what seems to work. And it's up to you to know whether you're ready and whether you want to own it, because if you don't own it, nothing's going to happen, however good the information is. But there's one thing that's been shown, is that if you do not have one non-negotiable where you do one thing, which clocks in the routine, you're going to be all over the place. And that non-negotiable we can come to. There's lots of ways to do it. But in the habit change space, science space, they're called PARs, prompts, actions, and rewards. You want to have a prompt that says, okay, it's 10 o'clock. I'm going to fall asleep at 11. I'm starting my routine. That's the prompt. And the action is to get your cycle going, whatever the cycle is for you. And then the reward is the next morning you go, I did it. And you reward yourself mentally, because that's actually very important, because it wires your brain to go, okay, I'm on it. I'm feeling confident. I'm feeling empowered. I've taken action that's working, and I'm doing small steps that make it happen. And then we always try to get people to do a 30-day challenge. Because 30 days people can understand. You 30 days, you track it, you write it on your fridge, you just check every day whether you did it or not, your habit routine. And after 30 days, you'll be rewiring your brain. And then you just make sure you continue it into transferring it into your daily life. I know it sounds easier than it is, of course. But the one other piece I want to share with you of all the habit science issues is something we all know, but sometimes don't do, and that is literally small steps. Actually, the evidence is fascinating, because actually the smaller the better. Why is that? Why should the smaller steps be more powerful? And the reason is obvious, because when we're stressed and we wake up in the middle of the night and we just super upset for something, or our bladder's full and we just forgot to not drink as much as we should, or we get upset that we're woken up and it puts us into a bad mood or makes us feel like we can't go back to sleep again. It's the small step that's going to win. It's the small step, whatever we do, to clock us back the other way, that's going to secrete dopamine, the reward chemical in our brain. And when we have dopamine, when we win, you can do anything. When we lose and we go, oh, this is terrible. How am I going to get back? I'm so tired. All that does is secrete other chemicals. We have 100 chemicals that we can slosh around in there and activate into a fire hose. Or we can drop the dopamine that just cascades into a positive, self-affirming contagion. It's contagious either way. So the small steps are critical. And the only other thing before we end off with the solution options is that we all start from different places. If you really don't have a sleep routine, you're on the first step, that's fine. Just find one thing that'll get you to the second step. But if you're on the 5th step, you've already got quite a good routine and you just want to fine tune it, find the one thing that's going to add to your fine tuning. So that's all the kind of overview. I want to end off with a couple of options, because ultimately it's useful to just have a checklist. This checklist from this podcast, and I'll share the slides, or your own checklist, but to check off one thing and to do it, because you cannot imagine, or you can imagine hopefully, the cascade of impact that one step and the dopamine and the reward and telling people about it and sharing it and secreting another chemical called oxytocin, which bonds you to people, and you laugh about it, share it, enjoy it. This is a cascade of steps. Okay, I want to go through the solution set and just quickly share with you, because I know I don't have a lot of time left. Let me check my time. Yeah, a few minutes. And I want to just quickly snapshot the big ones. Well, this wonderful man, a cardiologist at Harvard, Herbert Benson, he did this enormous amount of research into meditation, but he found something really crucial. He demystified a lot about the sort of vested interests of what people say about meditation and breath and all, because they're all wonderful, all of these things, but there's a deep scientific insight that he revealed at his research at Harvard. Repetition of anything is the key to calmness. Let me say that again. Repetition. And he's proved it. Now, it doesn't matter whether that repetition is breath, or whether it's a movement like yoga, or whether it's a mantra like a positive saying. Like I noticed some of you this morning, you've all got such wonderful positive sayings. Or whether it's music. It doesn't matter. What matters is what your brain likes and what you will do rather than what you should do. And that's why our sleep course is called 20 Sheep, because you can count sheep. If that's what works for you, good luck. So that is the main thing. If you take away nothing else, find something that you repeat as part of your sleep routine and make it happen. And lastly, just to go quickly now go through the final pieces, we all know that sleep is a routine. If we do not have a good set up our room as a nice sleep environment and get a routine going, that we go to bed at the same time, we wake up at the same time, and we do whatever works and tweak it. And of course, we know that there's a sleep switch. That switch does not get switched on if there's light. So we know that if we put the darkness on quickly, early in our routine, where we switch on the melatonin, which is part of the chemical switch, and we start the sleep cycle. But if we're looking at our phones or television or light or reading a novel that is suspenseful rather than calming, it's obvious the brain is going to be activated and you don't have a routine. You have an anti-switch routine. And temperature's amazing, 18 degrees centigrade, 64 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the optimal temperature. And it's fascinating. Read the research. It's easy to find. 1 degree centigrade can affect your sleep. Why wouldn't you just get that right? And lastly is what happens when I wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, which I do every morning. And I know Tim Durkin had this wonderful insight, and this is one of the wonders of wisdom. He said, he knows that he read that people wake up at 3 a.m. also because in the old days, we used to go to bed earlier because we lived by when the sun sets and when the sun rises. Today, that's different. But our biological clock has a natural tendency to wake up at 3. And then, certainly at my age and my prostate and all sorts of other things, and my bladder's full at 3 a.m. and it wakes me up. Now, if we focus on the negativity when we wake up, I can't get back to sleep, I've got negative perseverative bad thoughts, they will persist. Why? Because our brain focuses on the negative, and it's basically the negative thoughts can become contagious. So if we focus on it, they'll persist. So we need to find a way to just chill about it and accept that that's part of the biology. The brain will persist with negative thoughts and magnify them. So have strategies to either put them into context or find solutions that counter them. Like, what's the opposite of a negative thought? A positive thought, but one that works, not some la-la land thought, something that really is meaningful to you, and you'll do it. Okay, I want to share one other thing, and I'll be sending the links to where you can get a free access to this, but there's wonderful music that's brain-based. It just happens to be a company I also helped co-found called Brain Music Labs. Wonderful, wonderful man in LA, world-famous music producer, but he's a brain scientist now, and he created sound and tempo that'll push your brain into sleep, into relaxing, that's optimal for sleep. And then secondly, it's useful to do some of the, in addition to nature sounds, there's relaxation things you can do with your body by tensing and then relaxing each muscle, starting from the tips of your toe.
Welcome to your brain body relaxation.
And this is me speaking on
before
his
you
recording,
go to sleep.
And I'll get you
Create your sleep
But it's a
ready
guided
room.
meditation. It's like It's like a self-hypnosis. It only takes 2 minutes, but it is astonishingly helpful, especially when you want to get back to sleep. So I will send Tony the links for you to get access to these tools for free. We normally only get them through corporate, so they're not really available to consumers. And then that's it, really. The last things I want to just share before we end off on some questions is, obviously there's a lot of tips about sleep, and they're all good. But it's really important that you quickly find the ones that work for you, whether they're herbal tea or whether they're a warm bath, or whether there's a nap in the afternoon. Naps are a problem, by the way. Naps are great. I love naps, especially when I'm working really, really long hours. But they shouldn't be longer than 20 minutes. Why? Because if they're longer than 20 minutes, you start your sleep cycle, and that's not good. But if they're just a refreshing 20 minutes, set an alarm clock. There's also a thing called a nappuccino, which I'm sure you've heard of, which is have a coffee before you nap, because coffee takes 20 minutes to kick in. So when you have your 20-minute nap, and I can see some nodding there, and thank you for the tips, by the way, to get people to I can see all your faces, very interesting body language, and love the energy there from London. It's a London background. But basically, it's important to basically have the coffee before, if you're drinking coffee or tea, because the nap, you want to be alert when you wake up, so that the coffee kicks in 20 minutes later. So tips like that work. But to end off on 2 factors. If you're on a mild form of sleep problem, yes, there are things that help, but find the ones that work for you. Is it melatonin? It's a natural substance. It's the switch. It's the chemical switch. Is it chamomile tea? My late mother got me to try chamomile tea, and I love it. But there are many things that work, but not for everyone. The biggest thing we've seen in the world's biggest brain database that we set up is that it's amazing how different people enjoy different things. For some people, music works. For some people, a little bit of that's sort of activating the muscle and then relaxing works. For other people, just a meditation works. Everybody's different, and the same with natural sleep aids. Don't take anything for gospel in what you read in the mountain of articles and podcasts about sleep aids. Simply test it, but do it systematically. Find your checklist. If it doesn't make you sleep better that night or within 2 nights or maximum 3 nights, it's not for you. Move on, but do it systematically. Now, lastly, to end off with, okay, what happens if you have a real sleep, if you've got a problem where you've got sleep apnea and you're cutting off oxygen to your brain? There's no problem with just and you don't necessarily have to jump to a CPAP machine. The CPAP machine, people will find a way to try and sell you a CPAP machine. And by the way, for people who are on it, it's the life. Many, many, many people have thanked us for just helping them get to the right CPAP machine. It changes their lives because they're fresh in the day and they sleep wonderfully at night. But there are other things, mechanical things that you can do. And the first thing to do is just get a home test. They're available. You just get them through the mail. Now, obviously, none of these things are cheap, and obviously most people use it when they've got insurance. But there are many things you can do. And the other last thing I want to mention on the more serious side of it, obviously this is in conjunction with a sleep physician. You should never do this on your own or just trial and error it. Is these digital watches? They're all amazing because they have a very simple way to track your sleep. How is that? Movement. These little digital watches, they measure your movement as well as your heart rate and all that stuff, which is sometimes a bit harder to interpret, although I love heart rate as a measure. It tells you a lot. But just to keep it simple, why? Because when you dream, what happens? You don't move. So you can look in the morning, what was my dream cycle? When did I wake up? And you can use that as your objective metric in addition to the quality of your sleep. And honestly, you can buy some of those bands. You don't need an Apple Watch for this. You can buy bands for $10 that can tell you your movement, and they fine. They work really well, actually. That's all I got. I want to just end off with where I started. The power of doing one thing. We have about 50,000 thoughts a day. What is your strategy today that I'm hopeful you will share with me? And I'm certainly even listening to the comments and the wonderful, I know the new member Hugh was saying how wonderful it is to deal with a group of people who are so smart and thoughtful and sharing such cool stuff. So what's the one thing? that you're going to do today, from not just what I'm saying, but even the thoughts before we started, and Tim Durkin's wisdoms. But what is the action, the doing that you're going to take? And I want to end off with one other comment, which is beyond the scope of today. But there's one other step beyond doing, and that's being, presence. When we're really struggling, switching into just being present. We live lives of such success junkie orienting, pressured work, money, but there is just being. And I know that's a little maybe too spiritual for this morning, but I really think that being is the final and ultimate power of just being present. It doesn't need to be spiritual in a religious sense, but certainly being present fully in the moment is the most powerful switch in life. And with that, dear people, I will leave you with this little metaphor of thinking about the power of one small thing. It's not necessarily a straight line, but you can change one thing that can be that pebble, not in the water, but in the cosmos of your brain, and that wonderful electrical and chemical symphony that gives us this amazing experience of life and of sharing. And with that, I'll stop, Betty, and thank you again for the invitation, and just say what a joy it is to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you.
What a great presentation, and I want to thank you for being here, Evian. This is amazing. As somebody who has had a sleep problem for many years, I was sleeping only 5 hours a night, and that wasn't even straight through, and it was driving me literally crazy. So I had to develop habits, and I was listening to your presentation talking about training your PARs, and I started thinking back to when I was younger, traveling and flying a lot. I could get on an airplane, sit in my seat, and be asleep before the plane took off. But I trained myself to do that every time. So I had a certain position I would get into, certain thoughts and everything. And once I started thinking about that, I started my bedroom routines basically the same way, setting up those similar conditions as close as I could without sitting up in my bed. And that really helped me get where I could start getting sleep again. So.
Well, that's a perfectly put sort of adjunct from the world's best goal accomplishment person. So that's perfectly put. The goals and then small steps is just the perfect combination. So thank you for that context, Tony. Perfectly put.
Any questions from anybody? Raise your hand.
Yes, sir. I do. I have a question. A comment first, and then a question. Evian, thank you for a lovely presentation today. But I go back to your last one because I still use the 3 breaths. Anytime I hit a stressful situation, breathe in through the nose, out the mouth 3 times, and it's a whole new world. But and I heard that twice because you were kind enough to speak to my Rotary Club in Sebastopol, and I thank you. But my question is, I read somewhere that if you do have, in fact, sleep apnea, it precludes your ability to dream. Is that true or false?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't believe that. It's a really interesting impact. I think there is impact, but it doesn't preclude your ability to dream. So, Rick, thanks again, and thanks for. I've appreciated your organizing the talks. And Rick, just to emphasize what Rick said there about breath, breathing at 6 breaths a minute, so that you breathe into the count of 4, out to the count of 6, is one of the most important things you can do. Hopefully, taking that away from Rick today. When you're in the moment and you really want to switch off. Everybody knows short breaths, slow breaths are good, but that slow breaths at 6 breaths per minute, which is into 4, out for 6. So Rick, dreams do not stop. They can be affected though. And when you've got something that is as sort of systematic as sort of something that's pushing oxygen into your lungs, there's huge benefits in that, but it does change the sleep architecture slightly. It's the same other thing, Rick, of taking sleeping tablets. You know, a lot of people are severe enough and they get addicted to, very quickly actually get addicted to sleeping tablets, and they find, if you have to, absolutely have to, for short periods, but they also affect the sleep architecture and the quality of when and how we dream. You know, Rick, at the end of the day, so the answer is no, it does not switch off. Dreams are like so hardwired, Rick. It's these 90-minute cycles are so deeply embedded in our biology. It's fascinating. So, however, let me give you another example. When people get depressed, one of the most powerful ways we can see whether an antidepressive is working, now, of course, we can't do this only at a deep research level, is we fall asleep in 90-minute cycles. So the first dream cycle happens after 90 minutes. But when you're depressed, it happens after 60 minutes, just ballpark. So your whole architecture when you're depressed is thrown out. So yes, antidepressives help. Yes, sleep tablets help, but it's preferable the more that you use them as short term and get to being as natural as possible, because natural is the least intrusive into these 90-minute cycles and into our dream cycles that you can get. So a lot of things tinker with those cycles, including CPAP, but in balance, if you need it, it's super worth it. But dreams happen, and they're really important. We don't even know why, actually, Rick, but if you remove people's dreams, even for a couple of days, they start becoming quite significantly impaired.
Thank you, sir.
Krista, go ahead. Sorry, and I apologize. I did not call on you in the intros today. So you can always introduce yourself if you have time. But
well, I think the world knows who I am. Good. What a fascinating, amazing talk. And I must admit, my evil pleasure, my reason to go to bed. And even if it's late, just give me 5 minutes of television, which I suppose I should not be doing. That's one, my evil pleasure. Also, I get up fairly early, certainly by 6 o'clock, often 5:30 if I have a 7 o'clock meeting. And even when I'm exhausted, if I have to get up very early, going to bed, it's difficult to go to sleep. So what is it about this keep looking, oh, I have 4 more hours. Oh, I have 3.5 more hours. So will these good habits you want us to develop, will it help us in these extra stressful times?
Great question, and thank you for your wonderful positivity. Generally, it's very powerful. Look, I think, Chris, the thing is not to, I have the guilty pleasure of wanting to channel surf. I used to want to channel surf at the end of a long day. I wanted to I thought watching television in different ways was a switch off, and it was. I would just suggest you think about the timing of that. So what I did do is started to train myself to do that earlier rather than last. And that made a huge difference. So if you need to do something, and we all have our own, little indulgent pleasures, then just think about that main theme of what I'm sharing today, which is the 24-hour cycle. Think about when you do it, not if you should do it, because if your brain needs a reward, it should get a reward. And I often justify that to say, I deserve it. I've had a bad day. I deserve this indulgence, and I'll do it. But I'll be very, very thoughtful about when, so that the impact is diminished. So that's just one thing to think about. That would change, or see for yourself if it happens, if it works. Not last, but maybe do that first, and then have that. The last piece of preparing for sleep should be as switched off and as calm, and especially no television or mobile screen light, which is the blue light that switches off melatonin. It literally switches off the sleep switch, for real. It's biological. It's not theoretical. It's not some sort of word salad thing. It's really serious. So that's number one. And then the second thing about the negativity, you've just highlighted such a good example. So if we wake up too early and now we start these negative thought patterns. I won't get back to sleep again. This is, oh goodness, it's frustrating. All I'm saying is this: we live with a choice. We can either focus on negative thoughts that are impossible to sleep with, or get into an optimal stage of performance of any kind, because the brain is wired to keep us safe. So it's very sensitive to negative thoughts. And negative stuff can be helpful to us. It can help us see danger. But negative thoughts that are chronic and that are not helping us get into our chill state, our calm, flexible state, is unhelpful. But the trick is, if we focus on it, it makes it worse. So how do we get into a state where we just chilled about it and go, yes, this is a negative thought, I'm a bit frustrated, and it's to find the opposite. What is that one thing that'll switch on dopamine? What is one thing that's going to make me smile? What is one thing that I'm going to have as my go-to that is going to be my empowering, positive antidote to the inevitable frustrations, negative thoughts, regrets of the past, fears of the future? That's going to happen. So that's there. What is my antidote that works for me? And just by trial and error, we find them. But if we don't do that in a systematic way, then we're at the mercy of the randomness of waking up in a groggy state or confused or frustrated and thinking we're going to find them then. It's much less likely than if we just sit down with a pen and paper and write out some possibilities and just try and actually do them. 3 days. And you'll see, then after 30 days, you'll be shocked. You've rewired your brain, and then you've changed the battle and won the war. That's my few thoughts at this level. But everything we do is in subserving that issue. What can we do in the moment that can win that battle of self-empowerment when we have negative thoughts?
Wonderful. Tonight, I'm watching TV, then I'm having a bath and drinking my little calm drink, then going back to bed. It's funny, I usually put the heater on to warm up the sleeping area, so I won't do it.
Well, just check it. You check that it's 18. Sometimes warming up is good initially. That's why a warm bath is good, because temperature drops when we sleep. So by actually having warm first and then it drops, it's a great sleep thing. That's why people have warm baths. But I'd love you to try that, and I'd love you to let us know if it works, because you'll be a great testimonial, because you're infectious and contagious in your thoughts. So I look forward to seeing if it works.
Great. Susan Rowan.
Well, as I heard you speak, and I love this, I thought of Daniel Pink's book, When, where he talked about the Nappuccino, and BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits. But you have given me something I never have, a goal to be average. And that means I would like to have those 6 hours of sleep a night. I don't get them. This is probably too much information. When I began menopause, I said to my mother, oh, I'm not sleeping, it's menopause. And what you always need is someone who has your history. My mother of blessed memory said, what are you talking about? You were a lousy sleeper from the minute you were born. So that took all the stress off of me of being a lousy sleeper. But something I've done that I would really recommend to people, I take a warm bubble bath every night. And what that does is and I do deep breathing when I'm in the bubble bath, and I watch my stomach get bigger, but that's disconcerting. But the deep breathing and in the bubble bath, there's something about washes away the day and is relaxing. So I'm glad to know I was on the right path, but I can't thank you enough. I'm going to try one more little tiny habit. My other one is the TV always makes me fall asleep. So I have to get up the next morning and find out what I forgot and what I missed and rewind. So you will eliminate that for me. Thank you. This was great.
Well, thank you, Susan. That's such a great point, because I love the when and the BJ Fogg and Atomic Habits, and all the tips are wonderful. The only point that we try and add is the biology, this deep biology that we tune into, that just is the third leg of that triad of small steps and habits and being aware of the when. And so the biology and why bubble baths, and as you said before, that when you have a bath, you warm up your body temperature. When the body temperature drops, that's a signal to the brain that sleep is happening well. So these are all wonderful approaches, but biology, in my biased view, in the end wins. The more we tune in to our natural state, the more we empower ourselves. And that's why I think we're beginning to see, and why we work so closely with the American Heart Association with these online natural courses now, about moving to become more, eat more naturally, sleep more naturally. The technologies are wonderful. They have their role, but it turns out that my dear late grandmother was right. Simple is better and natural is better. It's obvious, but it's easy for the brain to be seduced by these amazing, shiny objects. And they are wonderful. They are wonderful, but there's nothing more wonderful than natural.
Cool. Thank you so much. We've had some late arrival members, Doug Bowers, Richard Sachs, and Don Persky. Glad to see you this morning. Glad you could make it. And I think, Antonio, did you have your hand raised? And I saw Bill Buchanan's hand raised somewhere. And then Betty.
Beautiful presentation. No raising. Thank you.
All right. Bill Buchanan, did you have a question?
Yes, Dr. Gordan, very, very well put together, packed with information presentation that affects us all. I have a question for you about the restorative part of sleep. Yesterday after my lunch with Hugh Coppin, I was all full of thoughts about Africa and all that sort of thing. Came home and I told Claire at dinner about the interesting lunch we had. And I said to Claire, do you remember the speaker that you recommended for the Breakfast Club about 10 or 15 years ago? She was a wildlife photographer that actually lived in the bush in Africa. An amazing woman. What was her name? Because you're the one that came up with. She said, I can't remember. I said, well, I can't either. So sure enough, this morning at breakfast, I said, Susie Esterhaus. Now, my question is, have there been studies on, the effect of sleep on restoring memory?
What a great question. Wow, these really great questions. And I mean that like they really are. So what's important about that question about restorative is the issue of, let me give you a quick analogy. It turns out that resilience is not just about recovery, it's about stress recovery. So once you overcome the adversity, you want to switch off to give the brain a chance to recover and find its natural balance. So stress recovery is the key to resilience. And similarly, it's the recovery part of sleep that is so crucial. Now, memory, and you've just summarized the whole basis, the most important number one thing about memory, stress reduction. Stress is the great derailer of all performance. Sleep, but particularly memory. So when you're relaxed and you're no longer stressed, your entire sort of bandwidth of what you remember changes. It is astonishing how much the brain actually has in there stored, because we're so perceptive. But it's also equally astonishing how hard it is sometimes to recall that. But de-stressing opens up the lens of that entire sort of bandwidth of these trillions of connections in our brains, which have wired memories of different kinds, but they are hard to access when they're stressed. So what an incredibly interesting example, Bill. And often people, when I train people about memory, for the most common one they want training for is to remember people's names. And of course, they just get introduced to someone, they can't remember their name, it's awkward. And by training stress reduction in the moment, it's a huge help to remember people's names. But the principle, Bill, is exactly what you said, whether it's in the moment or in the long run, like recovery after sleep, the principle is less stress is more memory.
Interesting. Thank you for that answer. One follow-up, one quick follow-up. I have been known to doze off during the day, especially when I'm reviewing something that is, very, very hard to, absorb or whatever, for whatever reason it's boring. But, my question is this, the optimum is 7 to 9. Can I add those 15, 20 minutes to my 7 hours?
That's a great question. No, it's actually no. It's a dozing off is actually preferable. It's preferable to rather, I would think, to think about a planned nap. Because a planned nap, if it's less than 30 minutes, 20 is a recommendation. If you're a coffee drinker with an cappuccino, although you don't want to have it too late, because it'll affect your cycle. But here's the thing, Bill. Just standing up. I mean, movement is the other big issue. Obviously, you don't need the American Heart Association to tell you this, but movement is the other. They say movement is the new smoking. We sit for too long. So literally just standing up. I mean, I'll give you one other example. We can all do that in 10 seconds. Even the way we sit, if you sit with your shoulders stooped, the message to your brain is not a good one. If you pull your shoulders just slightly back, we measure the brain. It is amazing. It's like a different brain state, literally, Bill. Just when you're feeling tired, you're going to fall asleep. I urge you to test this. Literally just sit up straight and pull your shoulders back. The massive input to your brain of activation is astonishing. And if you stand up for 10 seconds, you've changed the entire electrical chemical pattern of your brain to an activation state. There we go, Tony. Go, Tony, the man of action. So these tiny things, Bill, are worth testing. What is not that helpful is if you fall asleep and it goes on for random periods of time that kick in the sleep cycle, it's disruptive.
Thank you for that. One last throwaway, you don't have to answer this, but everybody knows that we have had bird dogs forever. I'm looking at one right now. He's our latest. He's 5 years old. He's dreaming. His toes, his feet are twitching and his lips are kind of moving. Has anybody done this? No, don't answer this. This is just, I'm just going to throw this out. There have to be some studies about animals dreaming.
Oh, totally.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll go on to the next question.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And Betty Tash, while you're yawning, maybe you should stand up and ask your question.
Well, which brings up, when I noticed I was yawning, a question. But before the question, thank you so much. Your presentation was fabulous. And, we spoke a couple months ago, and I started a program called the 6 a.m.ers with a group of realtors from across the country, where we're up and we're on a Zoom call twice a week with at 6 a.m. We do all these things, and take care of yourself in the morning. No TV, no phones, exactly what you've been discussing. And I changed my whole way of being literally 14 months ago, and going to bed earlier most of the time, like by 10, and up by 5:30, 5:15 sometimes. So it really is amazing, and it's one small step. So, and I also can attest that absolutely you dream with a CPAP. So that's that. I have 3 questions. One of them is, I yawn a lot, and I'm doing meditation. We do a 1-minute meditation with this group twice a week, and I'm yawning, meditating. So that's one question. Help me with yawning. The second question is, with the stress reduction, can it reverse some of the changes that the stress and inflammation has caused? You've kind of addressed it in the brain or whatever. And the third question is, what about jet lag? Do you have any thoughts on how somebody, I don't have it, but I know somebody that does, do you have anything about jet lag?
Yeah, so they three good questions, very tough ones, but good ones. These are really now getting to the nub of it. And yes, I really enjoyed listening to the way you've changed your life, and you're such a determined person. It's just wonderful to see that these small things can make a difference. So let's just start off with the jet lag one, because it's more like the basis of my takeaway today. So if you're changing your whole circadian rhythm, you're now going from night to day. My goodness, what is your brain thinking? It's going, what? What happened here? That's why daylight saving is a problem, because it actually get more heart attacks during daylight saving than you get any other time of the year. It's that simple. Even it's the world's biggest experiment in sleeping is daylight saving. You should look at the data. It's actually says everything. I trust data. I trust biology above all. So even that, Betty, just daylight saving. Now imagine when you're more than daylight saving, you're going to another time zone. So the way to really best attune to that is to start adjusting to the time zone you're going to land in. So you don't just wait till you get there and then suddenly start taking sleeping tablets to sleep. There's a whole cascade. You could imagine it just leads to all the negative things we've been thinking about. People can just be a little more attuned to, I'm going to a new cycle. So I'm going to start early to attune to it and start actually changing my sleep pattern. So it's not suddenly hitting this completely new zone. So you start putting your mind for the few days before into where you're going to be, and even changing your pattern slowly. So it's like, it's like getting your body used to the fact that the change is coming. But then it's also the most important thing you can do, and I should have mentioned this, by the way, in the solution set, I forgot to, is the sun. Melatonin is the switch. Now, melatonin switches off when it sees light, and it switches on when it sees dark. So when I get up in the morning, the very first thing, and I'm glad you asked this question because this is actually crucial, step outside and look at the sun for 5 seconds. That is the most important switch of the day, because sun, natural melatonin, natural sleep cycle. So when you're in at your new place where you've traveled to, get up in the morning straight away and look at the sun. So now you've clicked in naturally, and all these other pieces cascade. Yawning is a carbon dioxide thing. So you're not getting rid of your carbon dioxide, and you're not taking in oxygen well enough. So one of the things to just think about is aeration of where you're at, but also, Betty, it's a sign of fatigue. So you want to really stand up and just like you put your hands up before, or just move around for a minute before you have that period where you're doing something and you feel fatigued. Fatigue, again, is just you're losing the balance between the oxygen getting to your brain and getting rid of the carbon dioxide. Too much carbon dioxide, you yawn to get rid of it. It's just a bigger breath is all it is. Get rid of the carbon dioxide. And what was the third thing, Betty?
Can you reverse some of this inflammation?
It's the most important. This is why we work. My background was in the heart before I switched to the brain, and the American Heart Association, why they've moved to this program online, and you can look at it. It's called ThinkHeart, thinkheart.totalbrain.com, is because, Betty, there is evidence that if you, now this is not just going through the motions, you've got to be pretty extreme about it, but you've got to be seriously reduce your stress, seriously move more. Like they've got their details, but you've got to really move more, and a little bit like pushing yourself a little bit, not a lot. It's only 75 minutes a week. Seriously eat better. That's the number one thing, Betty, for inflammation, which is less animal products. Bottom line is less dairy, less animal product, more fruit and vegetables, all stuff we know. But these animal products have a lot of inflammatory potential. And so it's Mediterranean diet. At worst, it stops the chronic illness, but a full plant-based diet literally reverses. And I can show you the data from that. There's a man called Dean Ornish who lives nearby. Actually, he's in Sausalito, who's changed the nature of well-being because of his data on this stuff. And he's shown that you reverse with plant-based diet, and you'll stop the problem with the Mediterranean diet. And lastly, social connection. The quality of our connections are important, not just the quantity. So yes, Betty, the reversal is actually possible. And I believe that we are already seeing billions of dollars going into the anti-aging industry because of that evidence that it is possible. But it's not to be done in a superficial way. It's got to be more than just going through the motions. You've got to really train to get at least an hour or two a day of doing this like really intensely. But yeah, we can reverse inflammation for real, and the damage that it's done even.
Thank you.
Very cool. All right, who else has a question? Tim Durkin.
A great presentation. I've already sent you a note. In terms of dealing with sleep disruption, I have been accused, I think unjustly, of snoring, and disrupting the sleep of someone else in the room. And I took some steps to cure that, and I found it very, very simple cure and incredibly effective. And that is taking about an inch or an inch and a half length of micropore tape, micro P-O-R-E, you get it on Amazon, taping my mouth shut. It not only stopped the snoring, increased the sleep of the one, but it also helped me sleep a little bit differently. Is snoring sleep apnea in another form, or is it a sleep disruptor for the snorer?
Yeah,
doctor.
So thanks again for that, Tim. I mean, snoring is the sleep apnea. So that's the metric, is that we all snore. It's just how much. So if you snore for a long enough period, it just means your snoring is just this bit of soft tissue at the back of your throat over the tube. So the snoring is just the air coming out and it's causing a snoring sound. Now it's blocking our oxygen to our brain. So if it's for too long, that's why sleep apnea can be so helpful machine. However, Tim, when you look at we are integrationists. We look at all the solutions. The one you've just mentioned is fantastic, but there are others that can be tried. For example, there are mouth guards, just like a little guard you sleep with in your mouth, to keep your jaw in a certain position that makes it less likely for the snoring to occur. There obviously weight loss is one, but there are even the way your bed and your cushions and how you put it all. So it's really worth looking at the range of ways in which your airways can be put in a position that are most likely to not have them blocked. So these are mechanics. This is plumbing. This is airways plumbing. And that's what a CPAP is. It's a great plumbing solution to that problem. But all these other mechanical issues can be really helpful and should be looked at as well. Great example of the difference between apnea and a biological. And by the way, it's not anything people do. It's literally the shape of our faces that cause this sort of blockage, physics problem, almost mechanical problem.
Well, I know my wife is very grateful that I've used the tape, and she has at times asked me to put it on earlier in the day.
Yes. I know that one. Yep.
All right, thanks, Tim.